The first thing I felt was the heat thick, suffocating, and alive. I was sprawled in the red dirt, my vision blurred, head pounding like a drum inside my skull. My hands clawed at the dry soil, instinctively seeking stability. It took a few agonizing seconds for my senses to recalibrate, and when they did, I wished they hadn't. All around me, the battlefield lay in ruins. Charred corpses, twisted metal, and the smoldering wreckage of what was once the pinnacle of human military hardware. The smell of burning flesh, both human and alien, hung in the air. The kind of stench that clings to your soul, even after you've scrubbed your skin raw. I forced myself up, my armor cracked, but still functional. The heads-up display flickered weakly, struggling to stay alive, like me. My squad, what was left of them, lay scattered across the battlefield. Sergeant Davis was nearby, his body half crushed under a collapsed section of the gunship. Corporal Ortega wasn't so lucky, his head missing, likely blown apart by a plasma round. The Corvash didn't take prisoners, and even if they did, we weren't about to let them. I tried to shake the fog from my mind, focusing on the last thing I remembered. Our mission had been a long shot from the start, a strike deep into Corvash territory, meant to cripple their supply lines and delay their inevitable assault on Earth. We knew the risks, and in truth, none of us expected to come back. But hell, we didn't expect to be ambushed like this either. They'd known we were coming. Captain Kane, a strained voice crackled through my comms. It was Corporal Haynes. He sounded as beaten up as I felt. "You still alive, sir?" "Barely," I muttered, coughing against the acrid air. "Where are you?" 30 meters east of your position. We're pinned down. Corvash patrols sweeping the area." I glanced around. No movement yet, but it wouldn't be long before they finished the job. The Corvash were meticulous when it came to cleanup. They wouldn't leave us breathing for much longer. "I'm coming to you," I replied, gritting my teeth as I rose to my feet. My body protested every movement, pain flaring in places I didn't even know could hurt. But there was no time for that now. Pain was a luxury, one I couldn't afford. As I staggered across the battlefield, the memories of the past few hours flashed through my mind. We'd been sent to this hellhole of a planet Iri-9 on a covert mission to disrupt Corvash supply lines. What we hadn't counted on was the Corvash already being here in force, as if they'd been waiting for us. The firefight had been brutal, and in less than an hour, everything went to hell. I reached Haynes, who was crouched behind a large slab of debris, clutching his rifle with bloodied hands. His armor was in worse shape than mine, scorch marks decorating his chest plate, and his left leg twisted at an unnatural angle. He was pale, but his eyes still burned with that fire only humans had, desperate, furious, and determined to survive. "They wiped out the rest of the squad," Haynes rasped. "Corvash came out of nowhere. They knew." "Yeah, I figured as much," I said, leaning against the debris to catch my breath. "We're the only ones left." Haynes nodded grimly. "For now. They'll be back soon. We need to move." "We will," I assured him, scanning the horizon. The Corvash were out there, lurking in the shadows. They didn't charge blindly like humans. They stalked their prey. And we were their prey now, no doubt about it. But they'd made a mistake, one they didn't even realize. They thought we were weak. The Corvash considered themselves the ultimate predators. They ruled the galaxy through brute strength, raw aggression, and a culture bred for war. They saw us as soft, fragile creatures, too reliant on technology to survive without it. And maybe they were right about most of us. But they didn't understand what war did to humans. They didn't understand what being pushed to the edge could awaken in us. "You good to walk?" I asked Haynes. He winced, but nodded. "I've had worse." "Good. We'll need to stay low, avoid detection until we can figure out our next move. We're in deep Corvash territory now, and reinforcements aren't coming." Haynes chuckled darkly. "No backup, just the two of us." "Just the two of us," I repeated. "For now." We moved carefully, weaving between the wreckage and bodies, keeping to the shadows as best we could. The landscape was unforgiving red rock, jagged cliffs, and craters filled with ash. Iri-9 was a wasteland, perfect for a Corvash ambush, and they'd used it well. As we crept forward, my mind began to churn, piecing together what had gone wrong. Someone had tipped them off, or maybe they'd been watching us all along. Either way, it didn't matter now. All that mattered was survival and revenge. Minutes passed in tense silence, the only sounds the distant crackle of flames and the occasional distant roar of Corvash gunships. They were sweeping the area, likely hunting for survivors. My grip tightened on my rifle. If they wanted us, they'd have to come and get us. Suddenly, Haynes stopped, his face tightening in pain. "Captain," he whispered, "I don't think I'm going to make it." I turned, looking at his leg. The bleeding hadn't stopped. He was in worse shape than I thought. "We'll find shelter," I said firmly, refusing to entertain the alternative. "You just need to hold on a little longer." But I could see it in his eyes, he didn't have much longer. "Captain," Haynes coughed, his breathing labored. "It's been an honor." "Shut up, Haynes," I snapped, trying to focus. "You're not dying here." He gave me a faint smile. "We were screwed from the start, weren't we?" "Maybe," I admitted, "but not yet." We moved a little farther, the terrain shifting as we approached a rocky outcrop. There was a cave up ahead, not much, but it would be enough to hide us for now. I half-dragged, half-carried Haynes inside, setting him down gently against the cold stone wall. He was fading fast. "I can't," he whispered, his eyes losing focus. "I can't feel anything." "You don't need to," I said softly, kneeling beside him. "Just rest." His breathing slowed, and then stopped. My jaw clenched as I stood up, staring down at the last of my squad. The Corvash had taken everything from me. They'd destroyed my team, my mission, and now my friend. But they hadn't broken me. Not yet. A low rumble echoed outside the cave. Footsteps, heavy, deliberate, and getting closer. The Corvash were coming, and something deep inside me, something primal and dark, stirred. They thought they were predators, but they had no idea what they'd unleashed. End of part 1. This content may violate our usage policies. Did we get it wrong? Please tell us by giving this response a thumbs down. The footsteps outside the cave grew louder, and I knew we were running out of time. There had to be at least 3 of them, maybe more. Corvash moved in packs, like wolves, their senses sharp, their instincts lethal. But they were hunters by habit, not necessity. They relied on their numbers and overwhelming strength, the fear they inspired in their prey. They'd never encountered something like us. Not yet. I moved silently to the mouth of the cave, positioning myself behind a jagged rock that provided cover. My heart raced, every beat filling my veins with adrenaline, sharpening my focus. The Corvash were predators, sure, but predators could bleed. I switched my rifle to low-energy mode, cutting down the power output. Less noise, less chance of detection. I took a slow, deep breath, calming the rage inside me just enough to stay clear-headed. If I let it take over, I'd make mistakes, and mistakes would get me killed. The first Corvash appeared at the cave entrance, its massive silhouette blocking out the dying light from the red sky. They stood taller than a man by at least 2 feet, their thick exoskeleton-like armor making them look more like living tanks than living beings. Their eyes glowed faintly in the twilight, scanning the area for movement. They sniffed the air, searching for the scent of blood, fear, and death. It wouldn't take long for them to find me. I lined up the shot, aiming for the soft patch beneath its jaw. The Corvash might be armored like gods, but they had their weaknesses. The Corvash stepped forward, its heavy footsteps crunching against the dirt, and I exhaled slowly, finger on the trigger. Just as I squeezed the trigger, a second Corvash appeared, stepping into view. My pulse quickened, but I didn't waver. The first Corvash staggered back, gurgling as the plasma shot hit home, the low-powered round melting into its neck. It didn't scream. They never did. Corvash didn't express pain, not in any way we understood. But the way its body shuddered, the way it crumpled to the ground, said everything I needed to know. One down. The second Corvash snarled, crouching low as it realized what had happened. It moved faster than the first, its massive clawed hand reaching for the pulse rifle strapped to its back. But I was already moving, ducking out of cover, sliding behind a rock just as its shot blasted past where I had been. The cave walls trembled, dust falling from the ceiling. I rolled to my feet, bringing my rifle up, and fired again. The round hit the Corvash's shoulder, but its armor absorbed the impact. It growled, charging forward like a bull, intent on crushing me with sheer force. But that was the thing about the Corvash, they relied too much on brute strength, on intimidation. They didn't think, not like we did. I dodged to the side at the last second, narrowly avoiding the Corvash's charge as it slammed into the rock behind me. The ground shook from the impact, but I didn't stop to admire the damage. I spun, placing another shot right in the small gap in its armor behind the neck. It collapsed instantly. I didn't wait for the third one to show itself. I darted out of the cave, keeping low and fast, my senses on high alert. My mind raced with every step. I was alone now. Haynes was dead, the rest of the squad scattered in the dirt. If I didn't keep moving, I'd join them soon enough. The sky above was painted in hues of blood red and violet, the two suns of Erie 9 sinking below the horizon. The temperature dropped sharply, but I barely noticed. My blood was pumping, my mind focused on one thing, surviving long enough to strike back. The Corvash patrols would be sweeping the area for survivors, and judging by the rumbling sounds of distant gunships, they wouldn't stop until they were sure we were all dead. They hadn't left anything to chance, and that told me one thing: they were afraid. The Corvash didn't fear their enemies. They didn't need to. Not usually. But something about us had shaken them. They hadn't just ambushed us, they'd overcompensated. Too many forces. Too much effort. They'd been desperate to make sure we were wiped out. I wondered if, on some level, they understood. If they realized what humans were capable of when pushed into a corner. I reached a ridge overlooking the battlefield, the remains of the gunship visible in the distance. The fires had mostly died down, but the twisted metal carcass still smoldered, casting an eerie glow across the rocky landscape. The Corvash would likely use it as a base of operations, regrouping there while they searched for stragglers like me. I needed to get inside. It was risky, but I didn't have much choice. If I could salvage any equipment, communications, weapons, intel, it would give me a fighting chance. A chance to survive. I descended the ridge carefully, keeping low and scanning the horizon. No movement. No patrols. Yet, I moved quickly, darting from cover to cover, using the terrain to my advantage. The Corvash were strong, but they weren't fast, not like us, and they weren't quiet, either. They relied on sheer presence, on dominating their surroundings. But I'd learned long ago how to be invisible when I needed to be. As I neared the gunship wreck, I spotted a pair of Corvash guards standing near the main entry point. They were talking, or rather, growling in their guttural language, their massive bodies outlined against the dying light. I crouched behind a large boulder, weighing my options. I could try to take them out quietly, but if I failed, I'd have the entire Corvash patrol on me within minutes. No, I needed to be smarter than that. I scanned the area, looking for any other entrances, any weaknesses. My gaze fell on the wreckage of a supply crate, half buried under debris. If I could trigger a distraction. I slipped around the boulder, moving closer to the crate, careful not to make a sound. One wrong step, one loose rock, and it'd be over. My heart pounded in my chest, my muscles tense with anticipation. The Corvash continued their conversation, oblivious to my presence. I reached the crate and crouched beside it, prying open the damaged lid. Inside, I found what I was looking for: emergency flares. Primitive, sure, but they'd do the job. I grabbed one, igniting it with a snap of my fingers. The bright red light flared to life, casting long shadows across the ground. With a quick throw, I hurled the flare into the distance, sending it skidding across the dirt toward the far side of the wreckage. The Corvash immediately reacted, their heads snapping in the direction of the light. They exchanged a few words, then split up, one moving toward the flare, the other staying behind. Perfect. I waited for the first Corvash to move far enough away, then crept toward the remaining guard. My breath was steady, my focus razor sharp. I approached from behind, closing the distance in seconds. Before the Corvash could react, I brought my knife up, driving it into the exposed flesh at the back of its neck. It collapsed without a sound. I wiped the blade clean on its armor and retrieved its pulse rifle, slinging it over my shoulder. The Corvash weapon was heavy, unwieldy, but it would come in handy soon enough. I didn't plan on staying hidden forever. I slipped inside the wrecked gunship, the interior a maze of twisted metal and scorched consoles. The damage was worse than I'd expected. Most of the systems were fried, the result of a direct hit from Corvash artillery. But I wasn't looking for perfection. I just needed one thing: a working comm unit. I made my way to the bridge, my boots crunching over broken glass and debris. The air inside was thick with smoke, making it hard to breathe, but I pressed on. If there was a chance to contact command, to warn them about the Corvash's trap, I had to take it. When I reached the comm station, I almost didn't believe it. The console was damaged, but not beyond repair. The power flickered weakly, enough to indicate that it might still be operational. I sat down, fingers flying over the controls. The system was sluggish, barely responsive, but after a few tense minutes, I managed to get a signal. It was weak, unstable, but it was there. "This is Captain Elias Kane," I said, my voice hoarse from the smoke. "Strike Team Delta. Mission compromised. Corvash forces ambushed us. Requesting immediate evac and reinforcements." The signal crackled, static filling the comm. For a moment, I thought it had failed. Then, a voice came through. "We hear you, Captain Kane. Reinforcements are en route. Hold your position." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Reinforcements. Maybe we had a chance after all. But as the signal cut off, I heard something else. Something behind me. The low, rumbling growl of a Corvash. I turned, pulse racing, just in time to see it, another one, larger than the others, its eyes glowing with a predatory gleam. The real fight was just beginning. The Corvash that towered over me wasn't just a soldier. This one was different, more massive, its armor bulkier and plated with dark, intricate markings. Its eyes glowed a deeper red, and the way it moved, with a quiet confidence, told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't just a hunter. This was a commander, a high-ranking Corvash warrior, and it wasn't here by accident. It snarled, raising its weapon, an energy blade that hummed to life with a low, menacing buzz. The air crackled as the energy rippled along its edge, sharp enough to cut through steel. I barely had time to react. Ducking, I rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding the swing that would have cleaved me in half. The blade struck the console behind me, slicing through it like paper. Sparks erupted, bathing the room in a chaotic shower of light, but I didn't stop moving. The Corvash was fast, far faster than the others. It was on me in a heartbeat, swinging again. I blocked the strike with my rifle, but the force behind it sent me stumbling backward, crashing into the debris. The weapon in my hands groaned under the pressure, the barrel warping slightly from the impact. This wasn't a fight I could win head-on. I needed to be smarter. I scrambled to my feet, darting behind a support beam as the Corvash's blade whistled past, missing me by inches. My mind raced, trying to find an opening, a way to outmaneuver the hulking beast. But every time I moved, it anticipated, closing the distance before I could capitalize on any mistake. My heart pounded in my chest, adrenaline coursing through me, but there was a strange calm under the panic. I had been in tight spots before. Hell, I'd been in worse. I wasn't dead yet, and as long as I was still breathing, I had a chance. The Corvash stepped forward, its glowing eyes locking onto mine. It raised the blade high, preparing to bring it down in a final, killing blow. And then I saw it, an exposed conduit running along the wall behind the Corvash, damaged and sparking from the earlier explosion. If I could get it close enough. I darted forward, surprising the Corvash with a sudden burst of speed. I slid under its guard, the blade missing me by a hair's breadth, and slammed my shoulder into its armored leg. The impact barely budged it, but it was enough to throw off its balance for a split second. I used that moment, diving toward the wall. With a swift motion, I yanked one of the exposed wires free, sparks flying as the electricity surged through it. I didn't give the Corvash a chance to react. As it swung around to face me, I jammed the live wire into the side of its armor. The reaction was immediate. Electricity arced across the Corvash's body, its muscles spasming violently. It roared, a guttural, enraged sound that shook the room. Its energy blade flickered and died, the power surging through its systems too much for even its advanced tech to handle. I didn't hesitate. While it was stunned, I grabbed the pulse rifle, aiming for the gap in its helmet where the exoskeleton met flesh. I pulled the trigger. The shot rang out, the blast punching through the Corvash's skull. It collapsed to the ground in a heap, the glowing light in its eyes fading to nothing. I stood there for a moment, breathing heavily, the silence in the aftermath almost deafening. The smell of burnt circuits and charred flesh filled the air, but all I could feel was the blood pounding in my ears. That was too close. But it was over. I glanced down at the fallen Corvash, frowning. This one had been different. Smarter? Deadlier. They weren't just sending foot soldiers anymore, they were sending specialists. It wasn't just a routine hunt for them now. They were escalating. That was bad news for me. But it also meant they were getting desperate. They wanted us wiped out, and they were willing to risk their best to make it happen. That gave me a small, cold comfort. Desperation made being sloppy. I checked the comms console again, but the system was completely fried from the earlier surge. No more reinforcements. I was on my own. I grabbed what I could from the wreckage, a few power cells, a couple of grenades, a knife, and made my way out of the gunship, careful to avoid the remaining Corvash patrols. The night had fully settled in now, and the temperature had dropped even further, the cold biting through my gear. The stars above were bright, almost mocking in their beauty, as if unaware of the war raging below. The comm message I sent out earlier would reach them eventually. Command would send reinforcements, but I couldn't count on their arrival anytime soon. If I was going to survive, I had to take the fight to the Corvash before they found me again. And if they wanted a hunt, I'd give them one. Hours passed, but the night dragged on, and I found myself backtracking through a network of rocky valleys, staying out of sight. The terrain worked in my favor, offering plenty of places to hide, but the Corvash were relentless. I could hear them in the distance, howls, snarls, and the occasional burst of gunfire as they swept the area. I moved with purpose, always staying a step ahead, always listening for the slightest sound that might give me away. The rifle felt heavy in my hands, but I didn't let myself rest. Not yet. I needed a plan, something that could level the playing field. The Corvash might be physically stronger, but they were predictable. They followed patterns, routines. I just had to exploit that. As I approached a rocky outcrop, I heard something, the faint hum of machinery. I froze, listening. It was distant, barely audible over the wind, but it was there. A Corvash forward base? I crept closer, climbing the ridge until I could see down into the valley below. There it was, a Corvash supply outpost, light by the dull glow of floodlights. It wasn't large, just a few armored tents and vehicles, but it was heavily guarded. I counted at least a dozen Corvash soldiers, all armed to the teeth. But they weren't my target. Not yet. No, my eyes were on something else. Something more valuable. The Corvash gunship parked near the edge of the base. An operational gunship, likely fully armed and ready for combat. If I could get my hands on it. The plan formed in my mind, and I felt the surge of adrenaline again. It was risky, it was reckless, but if I could pull it off, I'd turn the tide of this fight in an instant. I circled the ridge, staying low, keeping out of sight as I made my way toward the outpost. My heart pounded in my chest, my senses sharp and alert. Every step, every breath was calculated, precise. As I got closer, I could see the Corvash soldiers more clearly. They moved in their usual, methodical way, patrolling in predictable patterns, talking in their guttural language, unaware that I was watching them. I reached the outer perimeter, crouching behind a supply crate as I surveyed the area. I had to be fast, had to move before they realized what was happening. I pulled out one of the grenades I'd salvaged, twisting the cap and setting the timer. With a quick throw, I sent it skidding across the dirt toward the far side of the camp. The explosion wasn't large, but it was loud enough to get their attention. Immediately, the Corvash reacted, several of them rushing toward the blast site, barking orders. It was the distraction I needed. I slipped through the shadows, making my way toward the gunship, the tension in my body like a coiled spring. I reached the gunship, quickly scanning the controls. I wasn't an expert pilot, but I'd flown Corvash ships before. The basic functions were similar enough to human tech. I could figure it out. But just as I started powering it up, something caught my eye. Movement. A Corvash soldier, standing at the edge of the camp, watching me. For a moment, we locked eyes, and I saw the recognition in its gaze. I had seconds. I slammed the controls, the gunship's engines roaring to life. The Corvash shouted an alarm, raising their weapons, but it was too late. The ship lifted off the ground, and I pulled the throttle, sending it rocketing into the sky. I was airborne. But the Corvash weren't done with me yet. Their gun emplacements on the ground lit up, firing into the sky as they tried to take me down. The ship rocked violently as the shots slammed into the hull, but I held on, gritting my teeth. I wasn't going down that easy. As the gunship soared higher, I angled it toward the Corvash camp, flipping the weapon systems online. They wanted to hunt me. Fine. Now I was hunting them. The Corvash camp below was in chaos. Floodlights flickered, casting long shadows as their soldiers scrambled in every direction. I could see them rushing toward gun emplacements, desperately trying to bring down the ship I'd just stolen from under their noses. But I wasn't about to give them that chance. I gripped the controls, fingers flying across the unfamiliar panels as I activated the gunship's weapon systems. The hum of energy charging filled the cockpit, and I could feel the raw power of the ship coursing through my hands. Corvash tech was more advanced than ours in some ways, but they'd never thought their own ship would be turned against them. That was their mistake. I smiled grimly, flipping the targeting system on. The heads-up display lit up with red dots, each one representing a Corvash soldier or vehicle below. They were still searching, still firing blindly into the sky, unaware that I was about to rain fire down on them. With a flick of my wrist, I locked onto the nearest target one of their heavy gun emplacements and unleashed a salvo of plasma rounds. The blue hot streaks tore through the night, slamming into the emplacement and exploding in a brilliant flash of light and debris. The blast sent Corvash soldiers flying, their armored bodies crumpling under the shockwave. I didn't stop. I swung the gunship around, strafing the camp with more plasma fire, cutting down anything that moved. Their confusion worked in my favor. They weren't prepared for this kind of attack, not from their own craft. The panic spread quickly, their disciplined formation falling apart as they realized what was happening. It was brutal, and it was quick. But there was no time for sympathy. This was war. One of the Corvash vehicles on the ground tried to escape, its engines roaring as it sped toward the cover of a nearby ravine. I targeted it, locking on just as it reached the edge of the camp. A missile streaked from the underside of the gunship, striking the vehicle dead on. It erupted in a ball of fire, the wreckage tumbling into the ravine below. I took a deep breath, the scent of smoke and scorched metal filling the cockpit. The adrenaline was still pumping through my veins, but the immediate threat was gone. The Corvash camp was little more than a smoldering ruin now, the bodies of their soldiers scattered across the ground. For the first time since the fight had begun, I allowed myself a moment to relax. The gunship hovered in place, its engines humming steadily as I scanned the wreckage below. It wasn't over. I knew that. The Corvash weren't the type to just roll over and give up. This was only the beginning. But for now, I had the advantage, and that was enough. I checked the ship's systems, making sure everything was still functioning. The hull had taken a few hits, but nothing critical. I still had plenty of firepower left, and more than enough fuel to keep moving. Good. I'd need it. I pulled up the navigational data, scanning the area for any signs of more Corvash forces. They would be looking for me now, especially after the stunt I just pulled. But I wasn't going to sit around and wait for them to catch up. If they wanted to hunt, I'd lead them on a chase they'd never forget. As I studied the map, something caught my eye, a signal, faint but unmistakable, coming from a few kilometers east of my current position. It was human. I frowned, leaning closer to the console. There shouldn't be any other humans out here. At least, not this deep behind enemy lines. I tapped a few buttons, enhancing the signal. It was a distress beacon. My mind raced. The Corvash were ruthless, but they didn't always kill their prey right away. Sometimes they captured survivors, using them for whatever sick games they played before finishing the job. If there were other humans out here, they wouldn't last long without help. I cursed under my breath. Every instinct told me to leave, to keep moving and stay ahead of the Corvash pursuit. But I couldn't shake the thought of those people, maybe soldiers, maybe civilians trapped, helpless, waiting to be slaughtered. I couldn't just leave them, not if there was a chance I could do something about it. Setting the gunship's course toward the distress signal, I throttled up, the engines roaring to life. The craft shot forward, cutting through the night like a spear, heading straight for the signal. Every second counted. I didn't know how many Corvash would be guarding the area or what condition the survivors were in, but I was about to find out. The landscape below blurred as I flew low and fast, keeping an eye on the radar for any signs of enemy patrols. The signal grew stronger the closer I got, a steady pulse on the console that guided me like a beacon in the dark. I could feel the tension building again, that tight knot in my chest as I prepared for whatever came next. After what felt like an eternity, I saw a small Corvash encampment nestled between two cliffs, barely visible in the darkness. It wasn't much, just a few tents, a couple of vehicles, and a cluster of cages near the center. My heart sank when I saw the cages. Human prisoners. I counted at least 5 of them, huddled together in the dark, their faces gaunt and bruised. They looked beaten, exhausted, but they were alive. For now. Corvash guards patrolled the perimeter, their eyes scanning the cliffs for any sign of trouble. They had no idea I was coming. I hovered the gunship just out of sight, weighing my options. A direct assault would be risky. The prisoners were too close to the guards, and if I wasn't careful, they could get caught in the crossfire. I needed to take out the Corvash without putting the humans at risk. That meant I had to get creative. I lowered the gunship behind a nearby ridge, setting it down as quietly as I could. The moment the engines powered down, I grabbed my rifle and the rest of the gear I'd scavenged earlier, strapping it all to my back. This was going to be close quarters. I'd have to move fast, hit them hard, and free the prisoners before anyone could react. I slipped out of the gunship, the night air cold against my skin as I crouched low and made my way toward the camp. Every step was calculated, careful, as I stayed in the shadows, avoiding the guards' line of sight. I reached the edge of the camp, hiding behind one of the larger vehicles as I scanned the area. There were 6 guards total, all armed, but they were spread out. I could take them, one by one, if I was quick enough. I unholstered my knife, gripping it tightly as I moved toward the first guard. He was standing near one of the tents, his back to me as he adjusted something on his wrist-mounted device. He didn't hear me approach. With a swift motion, I closed the distance, driving the blade into the gap between his armor plates. He stiffened, a gurgled sound escaping his throat as I pulled him into the shadows, lowering his body to the ground without a sound. 1 down. I continued through the camp, taking out each guard with brutal efficiency. The knife was quick, silent, and deadly in close quarters, and the Corvash didn't stand a chance. By the time I reached the cages, all 6 guards were down, their bodies hidden in the shadows. The prisoners stared at me, wide-eyed and disbelieving. One of them, a young soldier with a bloodied face, crawled to the front of a cage, his voice hoarse. Who are you?" "Doesn't matter," I said, kneeling by the cage lock. "I'm getting you out of here." I yanked open the lock, the metal creaking as the door swung wide. The prisoners didn't need any more encouragement. They scrambled out, their limbs stiff and weak from captivity, but their eyes burned with a renewed sense of hope. "We need to move," I said, scanning the area for any sign of reinforcements. "There's a gunship just over the ridge. It'll get us out of here, but we need to go now." The soldier nodded, helping the others to their feet. They moved as quickly as they could, leaning on each other for support. I led them back toward the gunship, every muscle tense as I listened for any sound of approaching Corvash. But we made it. As the last of the prisoners climbed aboard, I jumped into the pilot's seat, powering up the gunship's systems. The engines roared to life, and I could feel the familiar surge of energy beneath me as the ship lifted off the ground. The Corvash weren't going to like this. I didn't care. We were getting out of here. The gunship hummed as we soared low over the dark landscape, the tension in the cockpit thick. I glanced back at the group of human prisoners huddled in the rear of the ship. They looked broken, shaken by their captivity, but there was a flicker of hope in their eyes now, one that hadn't been there before. That was something. I didn't know how long it would last, though. The Corvash were relentless, and it wouldn't take them long to realize we were missing. If we didn't make it to safety soon, this ship would become a flying coffin. "We can't be too far from Allied territory," the young soldier said, leaning heavily against one of the bulkheads. His voice was still hoarse, his face pale, but there was a spark of determination there. "They were moving us deeper into Corvash territory when you found us." "I'll believe it when I see it," I muttered, scanning the sensors for any signs of pursuit. So far, nothing, but that wouldn't last. They'd be hunting for us soon. "You got a name?" "Private Harlan Davis," he replied. "Earth Defense Forces, 2nd Regiment. And you?" "Doesn't matter," I said, keeping my eyes on the console. "I'm just here to get us out alive." He didn't press the issue, which I appreciated. Names didn't matter much when you were just trying to survive another day. The gunship's sensors pinged, and I felt my stomach tighten. A red blip appeared on the radar Corvash patrol craft, closing in fast. "Damn it," I cursed under my breath, flipping a few switches to bring the ship's weapons back online. "Looks like they found us." "How many?" Davis asked, gripping the bulkhead for support as he tried to peer over my shoulder. "2, maybe more," I replied, "and they're not messing around." I punched the throttle, sending the gunship rocketing forward, skimming the surface of the terrain below. The Corvash craft were faster than ours, but I had the advantage of surprise and the terrain. If I could get us into the mountains, I might be able to lose them in the canyons. The rear of the gunship shuddered as the Corvash opened fire, plasma rounds sizzling past us in blinding streaks of blue light. I swerved hard to the left, narrowly avoiding a direct hit. "They're on us," Davis shouted, scrambling for something to hold onto as the gunship jerked violently. "Yeah, no kidding," I growled, twisting the ship into a steep dive toward a narrow canyon ahead. "If I could just get us into that ravine." The gunship plummeted toward the canyon, the rocky walls looming closer by the second. The Corvash ships followed, their plasma cannons lighting up the night behind us. I clenched my teeth, forcing the ship lower, the engines screaming in protest as we hurtled toward the ground. At the last possible moment, I pulled up hard, leveling the gunship out just above the canyon floor. The walls rushed past on either side, close enough that I could see the jagged rocks scraping against the ship's shields. I hoped the Corvash wouldn't be able to maneuver as well in such tight quarters. "They're still on us," Davis warned, his voice tight. "I know," I snapped, trying to focus on flying while the radar pinged ominously behind me. The Corvash were relentless, and they weren't about to let us slip away that easily. I had to think fast. There was no way we'd survive a prolonged firefight against those patrol ships. They outgunned us, outpaced us, and their pilots were merciless. But I had one thing on my side that they didn't: desperation. I banked hard to the right, weaving the gunship through the narrow canyon in a wild, unpredictable pattern. The walls blurred past, the rocky spires flashing in the night as we raced through the ravine. The Corvash ships were still behind us, their weapons lighting up the sky, but they were struggling to keep up. I glanced at the radar again. The Corvash ships had split up, one staying on our tail, while the other tried to flank us from above. Clever. They were trying to box us in, force us into a trap. But they were underestimating just how dangerous a cornered human could be. "Hang on," I warned the others, my grip tightening on the controls. I pushed the gunship to its limit, rocketing toward a narrow gap between two towering cliffs. The Corvash ship behind us was gaining, its weapons charging for another barrage. I could feel the heat of the plasma rounds streaking past, just barely missing us. At the last second, I pulled the gunship into a tight barrel roll, threading it through the gap with only inches to spare. The Corvash ship wasn't so lucky. It clipped the edge of the cliff, its engines sputtering as it spiraled out of control, crashing into the canyon wall in a fiery explosion. "One down," I muttered, the thrill of the kill momentarily pushing the fear aside. "Still got one more," Davis reminded me, pointing to the radar. The second Corvash ship was coming in from above, trying to cut us off at the next bend in the canyon. I couldn't outrun it this time. If I didn't act fast, we'd be sitting ducks. I slammed the gunship's controls forward, sending us into a steep climb up the canyon wall. The engines roared as we shot toward the sky, the Corvash ship closing in from behind. But I had a plan. As soon as we cleared the canyon ridge, I killed the engines, sending the gunship into freefall. The sudden loss of thrust caught the Corvash pilot off guard. He'd been expecting me to keep climbing, not drop like a stone. His ship soared past us, too fast to adjust course. Just what I wanted. I flipped the engines back on, pulling the gunship out of the dive just in time. The Corvash ship was directly ahead of us now, its back exposed. I didn't hesitate. I locked onto the ship's engine and fired. The missile streaked toward the Corvash craft, striking it dead center. The explosion lit up the night sky, pieces of the ship raining down into the canyon below. "And two," I said, exhaling the breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Davis let out a shaky laugh. That was something." "Yeah, well, don't get too comfortable," I warned. "We're not out of this yet." I checked the sensors again, making sure there were no more Corvash ships in the area. The skies were clear for now, but I knew it wouldn't last. We needed to get to a safe zone before the next patrol showed up. I set a course toward the nearest Allied outpost, hoping we could make it there before the Corvash sent reinforcements. The gunship settled into a steady flight path, the adrenaline from the dogfight slowly fading. I glanced back at the group of prisoners. They were all exhausted, slumped against the walls of the gunship, but there was a quiet sense of relief in the air. Davis caught my eye, offering a tired smile. "Thanks for what you did back there. I don't know how much longer we would have lasted if you hadn't shown up." I shrugged, turning back to the controls. "Don't mention it. We're not out of this yet." The truth was, I wasn't sure what drove me to rescue them in the first place. Maybe it was the soldier in me, the instinct to protect my own. Or maybe it was just spite wanting to deny the Corvash another victory. But as I looked at the weary faces of the prisoners, I felt something else too. A sense of responsibility. I couldn't just abandon them now, not after everything we'd been through. As we flew on through the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The Corvash were relentless hunters, and they wouldn't stop until they had their prey. But if they thought they could break us, they were in for a rude awakening. Because humans don't break easily. We fight back. The gunship finally pierced the horizon, and in the distance, I saw what we had been desperately hoping for: a small, fortified human outpost. It wasn't much, just a cluster of prefabricated buildings surrounded by a sturdy fence, but it meant safety, shelter, and supplies. My heart pounded in my chest, and I radioed ahead, hoping they hadn't moved on or abandoned it. "This is Earth Defense Command Gunship Bravo 49, requesting immediate clearance to land. We have human survivors on board. Repeat, survivors on board," I called out. For a few tense seconds, the only response was static. Then, the radio crackled to life, and a deep, gravelly voice came through. "Bravo 49, this is Outpost Theta. You're clear to land. Approach from Vector 79 and bring it in slow." I exhaled, relief washing over me. We'd made it barely, but we'd made it. The gunship descended slowly as I guided it toward the landing pad. Davis stood behind me, watching the approaching outpost with a mixture of awe and trepidation. The other prisoners, still too weak to stand, stirred slightly, sensing that we were finally out of immediate danger. The landing struts hit the ground with a heavy thud, and I powered down the engines. As the ramp lowered, I stood up, nodding at Davis. "Let's get these people out of here." We stepped off the gunship together, the cool night air hitting us as we walked down the ramp. A group of soldiers from the outpost came to meet us, weapons slung over their shoulders but eyes alert. They took one look at the human prisoners, and their expressions softened. "Got 'em. I didn't think we'd see any more survivors out here," one of the soldiers muttered as he helped a man off the gunship. "Neither did we," I replied, watching as they escorted the group into the safety of the outpost. Medical personnel rushed over, tending to the wounds and checking vitals. One of the officers, a grizzled man with a scar running down the side of his face, approached me and Davis. His name tag read Lieutenant Colonel Andros, and the hard look in his eyes told me he had seen his fair share of war. "You're the one who brought them in?" he asked, sizing me up with a sharp gaze. "That's right," I answered. He nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "You saved their lives. We've lost a lot of people out here, too many. Good to have some of them back." Davis cleared his throat, his voice still a bit hoarse. "How's the fight going? Are we making any progress?" Andros grimaced. "Depends on how you define progress. We're holding, but barely. The Corvash are relentless, and they're not letting up anytime soon. We've been trying to secure a foothold in this sector, but every day it's an uphill battle." I wasn't surprised. The Corvash had been slowly tightening their grip on this region for months. It was only a matter of time before they pushed us out entirely or worse. Andros gestured for us to follow him into the command center. The interior was dimly lit, with holographic maps and tactical displays covering the walls. A group of officers huddled around a large table, poring over battle plans and deployment charts. "We've been tracking Corvash movements in the area," Andros explained as he brought up a map on the central display. "They've been expanding their patrols, pushing deeper into our territory. We've managed to slow them down, but it's only a matter of time before they send reinforcements. And when that happens, we're going to need every able-bodied soldier we've got." Davis glanced at me, his eyes narrowing in concern. "You think they'll come for us?" Andros nodded grimly. "It's only a matter of time. They don't like loose ends." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. The Corvash didn't leave survivors. They hunted them down, erased them, wiped away any trace of their existence. We were all marked now, me, Davis, and the prisoners we'd rescued. If the Corvash found out we were here, this outpost would be next on their list. I took a deep breath, trying to steady the adrenaline that had been coursing through me since the escape. We needed a plan, something that would give us a fighting chance against the next wave. "If they're coming for us, we need to hit them first," I said, stepping closer to the map. "Take the fight to them." Andros raised an eyebrow. "You've got something in mind?" "I've flown in Corvash territory long enough to know their weak points," I replied. "They rely on their advanced tech, their drones, and their precision strikes. But they're predictable, they follow patterns, routines. We can exploit that. If we can disrupt their supply lines, hit their command nodes, we might be able to slow them down, maybe even force them to rethink their strategy." Andros considered this for a moment, then nodded slowly. "It's a risk, but if we do nothing, we're dead anyway." I glanced at Davis, who was already looking at me like I'd lost my mind. He knew what I was thinking, but he didn't argue. We didn't have time to argue. The clock was ticking, and if we wanted to survive, we'd need to act fast. "What's the plan?" Davis asked, folding his arms across his chest. I studied the map, my mind racing. The Corvash were methodical, but they had blind spots. Their drones patrolled in overlapping grids, leaving small gaps in coverage. If we could time our movements just right, We could slip through those gaps and strike at the heart of their operation. We'll need a small team, I said, tracing a line across the map. Just a handful of us hit and run. We'll infiltrate one of their supply depots, plant charges, and get out before they realize what happened. It won't stop them, but it'll slow them down. Davis nodded. I'm in. I'll have to send a few of my best men with you, Andros added, his expression hardening. You're going to need all the help you can get. The reality of the situation was starting to sink in. We weren't just trying to escape anymore, we were gearing up for a full-scale assault on Corvash forces deep in their own territory. It was suicide, plain and simple. But if we didn't do something, the Corvash would overrun us, and it would be game over for everyone in this sector. Andros gave the orders, and within the hour, we were suiting up for the mission. I strapped on my combat vest, checking the power levels on my plasma rifle. Davis was beside me, loading extra mags into his pack. You ever done something like this before? He asked, glancing at me as he slung his rifle over his shoulder. More times than I'd like to admit, I replied, locking the magazine into place with a satisfying click. Davis smirked. So, what do we call you? You never did give me your name. I hesitated for a moment, then sighed. Hawk. Call me Hawk. Hawk, huh? Figures, Davis said with a grin. Let's hope you can fly as well as you fight. The rest of the team was waiting for us by the gunship, a squad of hardened soldiers, each one looking as grim as the next. They didn't say much, but I could tell from their steely eyes that they knew what we were up against. We boarded the gunship once more, this time with a clear objective. The mission was simple: hit the Corvash supply depot, blow it sky high, and get out. But nothing was ever simple with the Corvash. As the gunship lifted off, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into a trap. The Corvash were hunters, and they'd been playing this game a lot longer than we had. But humans weren't prey, not anymore. As we soared into the night, the weight of the mission pressed down on me. This was it, our last shot at survival. If we failed, there would be no second chances. The Corvash had underestimated us once before. This time, we'd make sure they paid for it. The gunship cut through the cool night air, the dim glow of the cockpit light our tense faces. The adrenaline coursed through me, a blend of anticipation and dread as we flew toward the Corvash supply depot. The landscape below was a mix of rugged terrain and the occasional flash of distant lights marking the alien installations. I gripped the controls tighter, trying to push the weight of the mission from my mind. As we neared the target, Andros's voice crackled over the comms, reminding us of the plan. Remember, we're going in fast and quiet. We can't afford to attract attention. Get in, plant the charges, and get out before they know we're there. Understood? Understood, I replied, feeling the collective resolve of the team in the air. Davis was in the back, sitting with the other soldiers. I could see him checking his gear, his face set with determination. He was ready. We were all ready. The squad had faced countless battles, and they trusted my instincts, something I wasn't sure I fully trusted myself. The gunship landed just outside the perimeter of the depot, the hum of the engines fading into an eerie silence. We disembarked quickly, moving in a tight formation toward the supply depot. The place loomed ahead, a sprawling structure surrounded by a high fence, floodlights sweeping the area in systematic patterns. The Corvash were meticulous, leaving little room for error. Stay low and watch for patrols, I instructed, scanning the area. We'll use the shadows to get closer. We moved silently, keeping to the cover of rocks and brush. Every step felt like a heartbeat, the tension in the air thick enough to slice. As we approached the fence, I glanced back at the soldiers. Their expressions were grim but resolute. They had seen enough death to know that this mission could end with ours. Davis, I whispered, gesturing toward a small gap in the fence. You take point. Get us in. He nodded, slipping through the opening with the quiet grace of a seasoned soldier. The rest of us followed, careful not to make any noise that could alert the guards. Once inside, the supply depot was a maze of crates, machines, and unmarked vehicles. The faint hum of machinery filled the air, punctuated by distant voices in an alien tongue. My pulse quickened. We were on borrowed time, and the Corvash would be patrolling the area, looking for any signs of intrusion. I motioned for the team to spread out, ensuring we kept our distance from the more open areas. I could see the central command building ahead, a larger structure that would likely house their most critical supplies. If we could hit that, it would send shockwaves through their operations. "Keep an eye on your surroundings," I whispered, moving cautiously toward the command building. "Davis, you're with me. The rest of you, cover our backs." The soldiers nodded, spreading out into the shadows. Davis fell in step beside me as we crept closer to the command building. The entrance was guarded, 2 Corvash sentries standing watch, their armored forms tense and alert. "Think we can take them?" Davis asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I scanned the area, looking for an opening. "We have to. We can't let them call for reinforcements." I took a deep breath, suppressing the growing anxiety in my chest. With a quick nod, I initiated our plan. I'd always been better at taking the initiative, and this wasn't going to be any different. "On my mark," I whispered, pulling my plasma rifle from my shoulder. Davis nodded, readying his weapon. "I'm with you." I counted down silently in my head, then surged forward, charging at the guards. The element of surprise was our best weapon, and we'd need every advantage we could muster. The first Corvash barely had time to react before I tackled him to the ground, my rifle pressed against his throat. Davis followed suit, taking down the second guard in a quick motion. We moved fast, adrenaline fueling our actions as we disabled the guards before they could raise the alarm. "Secure them," I ordered, glancing around for any additional threats. The area was still quiet, the distant voices in the command building providing a grim backdrop. Davis nodded, dragging one of the guards behind a stack of crates, while I tied up the other with some cord I'd pulled from my gear. "What now?" he asked, breathless. "Now we go inside," I replied, gesturing toward the command building. "We need to plant the charges before they realize something is wrong." We slipped through the door, and my senses went on high alert. The interior was dimly lit, with consoles blinking and a central command table displaying tactical data about the surrounding area. Corvash soldiers bustled about, unaware of the impending danger. "Split up," I whispered. "Davis, you take the left. I'll cover the right. Find a good spot to plant the charges." He nodded and moved silently toward his side, and I took a moment to observe the layout of the room. There were too many of them, at least 6 Corvash soldiers patrolling the area, and they were all too close for comfort. I darted to a side console, keeping low. My heart raced as I pulled out the demolition charges. Each one was small but packed enough explosive power to take down the building, and hopefully the supply lines as well. I quickly affixed one charge to the central command table, making sure it was well hidden. The timer was set for 10 minutes, plenty of time if we moved quickly. Just as I finished, I caught sight of Davis a few meters away, crouched near another console. His eyes widened as he spotted a group of Corvash entering from a side door. "Back," he hissed, and I ducked behind the console just as they approached. The Corvash soldiers began speaking to one another in their guttural language, pointing at the screens and discussing something that made my skin crawl. They were so close now, and I could feel the weight of their presence bearing down on us. "Do you think they know we're here?" Davis whispered, his eyes darting around. I shook my head, trying to keep my voice steady. "Not yet. Just hold tight. We need to wait for the right moment." But the longer we waited, the more uneasy I felt. The Corvash were intelligent, and their instincts told them when something was off. I could see them becoming more agitated, glancing around as if sensing an unseen threat. "Let's make a distraction," I whispered to Davis, formulating a quick plan. "We can set off the alarms. It'll draw them away from the exits." Davis looked at me, eyes wide. "You think it'll work?" "Has to," I replied, motioning for him to follow. "We just need to create chaos." We slipped over to the main control panel, where the alarms were housed. I quickly accessed the system, my heart pounding as I manipulated the controls. With a few taps, I activated the alarm protocols. The sound erupted like a thunderclap, sirens wailing throughout the depot. Lights began flashing red, and the Corvash soldiers immediately sprang into action, confusion spreading through their ranks. "Now!" I yelled, grabbing Davis as we dashed for the exit. We moved through the chaos, slipping past soldiers who were scrambling to figure out what was happening. The alarms blared, echoing off the walls, and the Corvash were fully distracted. "Let's head for the gunship," Davis shouted, his voice barely audible over the noise. I nodded. But just as we reached the exit, a group of Corvash guards came rushing in from the outside, weapons drawn. "Get down!" I yelled, and we both hit the ground as plasma bolts flew over our heads. Davis fired back, covering us as we scrambled for cover. "We can't stay here." "I know," I shouted, scanning for an escape route. "We need to split up." He looked at me, panic in his eyes. "What do you mean?" "We'll get picked off." "We'll rendezvous at the gunship," I insisted, forcing myself to keep calm. "I'll create a diversion. You make it to the ship and get everyone out. They'll follow me." Without waiting for a response, I rolled out from behind cover and began firing at the nearest group of Corvash. Their attention shifted immediately, giving Davis the chance he needed. "Go!" I yelled, covering him as he sprinted away. I unleashed a barrage of plasma bolts, forcing the Corvash to take cover. "Come on, you bastards! You want me. Come and get me." The Corvash soldiers were momentarily distracted, their focus shifting toward me as I drew their fire. I could hear Davis's footsteps fading into the chaos, and my heart raced with a mix of fear and adrenaline. I was now the target, and it felt exhilarating. The Corvash were relentless hunters, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. I ducked behind a nearby crate as they returned fire, plasma bolts sizzling past me. The walls around us exploded in a shower of debris, but I didn't falter. I'd faced worse odds before, and I wasn't about to let them take me down. "Come on," I shouted, moving to the next point of cover. "I'm right here." The Corvash were closing in, but I had a plan. I'd bought enough time for Davis and the others to escape, but now it was my turn to go loud. Pulling a grenade from my belt, I pulled the pin and tossed it into the center of their formation. The explosion sent shockwaves through the air, and I didn't wait to see the aftermath. I sprinted for the exit, adrenaline surging as I ducked and rolled, narrowly avoiding another barrage of plasma fire. As I burst through the door, the night air hit me like a wave. The gunship was just a short distance away, and I could see Davis already inside, frantically signaling for me to hurry. "Come on, Hawk," he shouted, his voice laced with urgency. I didn't need to be told twice. I ran for the ship, dodging incoming fire and throwing myself into the open hatch. The moment I was inside, the ramp began to lift, and the engines roared to life. "Go, go, go," Davis yelled as I secured my harness. The gunship lifted off, and I glanced back at the supply depot. The alarms blared, red lights flashing against the night sky, and I could see Corvash scrambling in confusion. "Did you get the charges planted?" Davis asked, his eyes wide with adrenaline. "Yeah," I panted, still catching my breath. "It's going to blow in a few minutes." "Let's hope they're still inside when it does," he said, grinning despite the chaos. As the gunship soared away from the depot, I felt a mix of exhilaration and relief. We'd done it at least for now. But I knew the Corvash wouldn't stop. They'd regroup, and they'd come after us with everything they had. "Now what?" Davis asked, glancing at the tactical displays. "Now we regroup with Andros and plan our next move," I replied, my mind already racing with possibilities. "This isn't over. We have to strike again before they can fully respond." As we flew away, the explosion rocked the night sky behind us. A bright flash lit the landscape. It felt like a small victory in a larger war, but it was enough to give us hope. Hope was all we had left, and it was time to turn the tide. The gunship soared through the night. The distant glow of the supply depot's explosion lit the horizon. We had momentarily escaped the clutches of the Corvash, But I knew this victory was fleeting. They wouldn't give up easily, and our reprieve would be short-lived. As we flew, I glanced over at Davis, who was hunched over the tactical display, analyzing the data streaming in. "What's the status of the Corvash?" I asked, leaning closer. "They've initiated lockdown protocols at the depot," he replied, furrowing his brow. "They're on high alert, but I also see some anomalies in their communications. It seems they're confused about our exact location." I couldn't help but smirk at the thought. "Good. Let's keep them guessing." Andros, who had been piloting the gunship, turned in his seat, his expression grave. "We need to figure out our next move. We've disrupted their operations, but they'll retaliate. We can't stay on the defensive." "Then let's go on the offensive," I suggested. "We've seen what they're capable of, but we've also proven they can bleed. We need to strike at their command center next." Davis nodded, inputting coordinates into the navigation system. "There's an old Corvash outpost not far from here, mostly abandoned. It could be a good place to gather intel or even set up a temporary base." "Then let's move," I said, feeling the familiar rush of determination coursing through me. We were on the edge of something bigger, and I could feel it. The gunship changed course, heading toward the outpost. As we flew, I looked out at the landscape passing beneath us, jagged mountains silhouetted against the starry sky, the valleys shrouded in mist. It was beautiful, yet haunting, a reminder of the dangers that lurked in the shadows. "Any idea what we might find at the outpost?" I asked Davis, trying to shake off the tension coiling in my gut. "Could be anything," he replied. "Weapons caches, intel, even a few surviving Corvash. We should be prepared for anything." As we approached the outpost, the wreckage of the once thriving facility came into view. The Corvash structures loomed, twisted metal and shattered walls telling a story of past conflicts. The area felt eerily quiet, devoid of life, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. "We're here," Andros announced, bringing the gunship to a hover above the main compound. "Let's check it out. Stay sharp." We disembarked, weapons at the ready, stepping cautiously onto the uneven ground. The atmosphere was thick with tension, and every sound seemed magnified: the crunch of gravel beneath our boots, the distant rustle of leaves. "I'll take point," I said, gesturing for the others to follow. "Let's move in pairs." Davis paired up with me, and the rest of the squad spread out behind us. We approached the nearest building, a crumbling structure that had likely served as a barracks. The entrance was ajar, swinging slightly in the breeze. "Check for traps," I instructed, scanning the area for signs of danger. Davis nodded, stepping forward cautiously. He pushed the door open, revealing a dark interior. The air was stale, filled with the scent of decay and rust. "Looks clear," he said, stepping inside. I followed closely, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The room was filled with remnants of the past: old bunk beds, scattered equipment, and faded posters of Corvash propaganda. It felt like a tomb. "Let's search for anything useful," I said, moving to the nearest desk. I rifled through the drawers, finding only broken tools and discarded papers. Frustration welled up inside me. We needed something substantial, a lead that would give us an edge. "Over here," Davis called, his voice echoing from the far end of the room. I hurried over, finding him examining a wall covered in data screens. "I think these are operational," he said, tapping on the screens. "If we can access the core systems, we might find intel on their troop movements or supply lines." "Can you get in?" I asked, looking over his shoulder. "Let me try," he replied, fingers flying over the controls. As he worked, I kept an eye on the door, half expecting a Corvash patrol to come storming in. But the outpost remained eerily quiet, the silence almost suffocating. "Got it," Davis exclaimed, and the screens flickered to life, displaying a series of maps and encrypted files. "Looks like they've been tracking our movements since we launched the attack." I leaned in closer, studying the data. "This is gold. If we can intercept their supply routes, we could cut off their reinforcements." Davis continued scrolling through the files. And look at this coordinates for their main command center. We can strike before they even know what hit them. Let's download everything, I said, urgency creeping into my voice. We need to move fast. Davis initiated the data transfer, but just as he did, an alarm blared, shattering the silence. The klaxon echoed through the building, sending my heart racing. "Oh no, they're on to us," I shouted, grabbing Davis and pulling him away from the screens. "We have to get out of here, now." We dashed toward the exit, but as we reached the door, a group of Corvash soldiers burst in, their weapons raised and eyes narrowed with hostility. "Get down," I yelled, pushing Davis to the ground as I opened fire. Plasma bolts whizzed past us, and I took cover behind a crumbling wall, my heart pounding in my chest. "We're outnumbered," I shouted to Davis, who was fumbling for his weapon. "I've got it," he replied, his voice steady despite the chaos. I peeked around the wall, assessing our situation. The Corvash were moving in, attempting to flank us. "We need to create a diversion," I said, scanning the room for anything we could use. "On it," Davis said, tossing a grenade toward the group of soldiers. It detonated with a deafening blast, sending debris flying and momentarily stunning our attackers. "Let's go," I yelled, sprinting toward the exit as the Corvash struggled to regain their composure. We burst out into the open air, the alarm still blaring behind us. The gunship was just a short distance away, but the Corvash were already regrouping, their numbers overwhelming. "Cover me," I shouted to Davis as I sprinted for the ship. I could hear the sounds of plasma fire erupting behind me, but I didn't look back. I had to keep moving. Davis provided cover fire, his shots ringing out as I reached the gunship and jumped inside. "Get us out of here," I yelled to Andros, who was already at the controls, readying for takeoff. "Hold on," he replied, flipping switches as the engines roared to life. I could see the Corvash closing in, their weapons trained on us. "Hurry," I urged, my heart racing. The gunship lifted off the ground just as plasma bolts struck the hull. I could feel the impact reverberate through the ship, and I held my breath as we ascended into the sky. "We're clear," Andros shouted, maneuvering the ship into a sharp turn. "But we need to shake them off." Davis slumped into a seat, breathing heavily. "That was too close." I nodded, still feeling the adrenaline coursing through me. "But we got the intel. We know where to hit them next." As the gunship soared through the stars, I glanced back at the outpost, a smoldering ruin against the backdrop of the night. It was a reminder of the stakes we faced. We were far from finished. "Prepare for the next strike," I said, my voice steady. "This time, we take the fight to them." As we flew deeper into the night, the adrenaline from our narrow escape began to fade, replaced by the urgency of our mission. The intel we'd gathered was crucial, revealing the location of the Corvash command center, an opportunity we couldn't afford to waste. I stood in the cockpit, leaning over Davis, who was poring through the data on the tactical display. "What do we know about the command center?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady despite the anxiety coiling in my stomach. "It's heavily fortified," Davis replied, his eyes scanning the screens. "Automated defenses, multiple sentry points, and a significant troop presence. They've got to be expecting us." I crossed my arms, considering our options. We can't just storm the place. We need to find a way to exploit their defenses, get inside, and disrupt their operations from within. Andros, focused on piloting, chimed in. "We can use the element of surprise to our advantage. If we hit them at a time when they least expect it, we might be able to breach their defenses before they can mount a proper defense." "Exactly," I agreed, the wheels in my mind turning. "We'll approach under the cover of darkness, make our way to the outer perimeter, and plant explosives to take out their automated defenses. Once those are down, we can move in." Davis nodded, enthusiasm creeping into his voice. "And if we can create a diversion on one side, we can split their forces, making it easier for us to slip in undetected." "Let's finalize our plan," I said, determination surging within me. "We've got the coordinates. If we leave now, We can reach the command center by dawn. With our plan in place, we set the course for the Corvash stronghold. The mood in the gunship shifted as we prepared for the impending battle. We reviewed the schematics of the command center, outlining our approach, timing, and points of entry. As the first rays of dawn began to break on the horizon, we approached the command center, shrouded in mist and looming ominously against the rising sun. The Corvash structure stood tall, a fortress bristling with weaponry and defenses. "Stay sharp," I warned, my pulse quickening. "We're about to enter hostile territory." Andros maneuvered the gunship into a low hover, allowing us to disembark unnoticed at the edge of a dense thicket just outside the perimeter. We could see the command center in the distance, a mix of towering walls and advanced tech, with patrols moving methodically along the walls. "Davis, you and I will plant the explosives," I said, glancing at the small pack of charges strapped to my back. "Andros, you cover us from here. If things go south, you'll need to get us out fast." "Copy that," Andros replied, adjusting the weapon mounted on the gunship's side. We crept forward, moving low and slow through the underbrush. The sounds of the Corvash patrols echoed around us, the clanking of their armor mingling with the soft rustle of leaves. "There's a patrol coming our way," I whispered, crouching behind a thick bush. Davis pressed in close, his breath quickening as he scanned the area. "Let's wait for them to pass," he said, keeping his weapon at the ready. We watched as two Corvash soldiers strolled by, their voices low and guttural. I could see the jagged edges of their armor glinting in the early light, a stark reminder of the danger we were up against. Once they moved on, we continued our advance, reaching the edge of the command center's outer wall. The automated defenses loomed overhead, turrets and drones scanning the area, ready to react to any sign of intrusion. "Now or never," I muttered, pulling out one of the explosives. "We need to find a blind spot." Davis nodded, scanning the perimeter. "Over there," he pointed, indicating a section of wall that appeared less monitored, a small gap where we might slip through. We darted toward it, hearts pounding as we approached. I placed the charge against the wall, securing it in place. "On my count," I said, glancing at Davis. 3, 2, 1, now!" I pressed the detonator, and the charge exploded, sending debris flying and a cloud of dust into the air. The automated defenses whirred to life, lasers firing randomly in response to the commotion. "Let's move," I shouted, sprinting through the gap we'd created. We ducked and rolled as the alarms blared, the sound piercing through the chaos. "Head for the control room," I yelled, navigating through the maze of corridors. The layout was complicated, but the schematics we'd studied helped us stay on course. The guards were scrambling, confusion evident in their movements as we dodged through the chaos. We reached a door marked Control Room, and I pushed it open, finding ourselves inside a dimly lit chamber filled with monitors and control panels. "Get to the main terminal," I instructed Davis, who was already moving to the nearest console. I took a quick look around, spotting a security feed displaying frantic Corvash soldiers rushing to our location. "I'm in," Davis exclaimed, fingers flying over the controls. "Downloading intel now." "Good," I said, keeping watch at the door. "We need to be ready to bail as soon as you're done." As he worked, I scanned the room for any weapons or gear we could use. A rack in the corner caught my eye, filled with Corvash blasters. I grabbed a couple, handing one to Davis. "Here, take this." "Almost done," he shouted, the tension evident in his voice. Suddenly, the door slammed open, and a squad of Corvash soldiers stormed in, weapons drawn. I instinctively raised my blaster, firing at the nearest one, but the rest quickly retaliated. "Get down," Davis yelled, diving behind the console as plasma bolts erupted around us. I ducked low, adrenaline surging as I exchanged fire with the approaching soldiers. "We can't hold them off forever," I shouted, looking for any way out. "Just a few more seconds," Davis shouted back, the stress palpable in his voice. "Cover me," I yelled, lunging toward the nearest window, blasting it open with a shot. Glass shattered, and I could see the courtyard below an open space. but filled with incoming Corvash. "Done!" Davis shouted triumphantly, clutching a data pad filled with vital information. "Let's go!" I jumped through the window, landing in a roll and immediately coming up in a crouch. "This way!" I shouted, beckoning for Davis to follow. He jumped through the window, but just as he landed, a plasma bolt struck the ground nearby, sending him tumbling. "Get up!" I yelled, grabbing his arm and pulling him to his feet. We sprinted toward the perimeter, the sound of pursuit hot on our heels. The Corvash were relentless, but we couldn't afford to slow down. "Over here!" I shouted, spotting an open maintenance hatch. We dove inside, slamming the door shut behind us. The cramped space was dark and filled with the smell of oil and machinery. I took a moment to catch my breath, my heart racing as I pressed my ear against the door, listening for signs of the Corvash. "We need to get to the ship," I panted, glancing at Davis. "Can you access the schematics from here?" "Give me a second," he replied, pulling up the data pad. "If I can find the layout of the maintenance tunnels, we might be able to slip out the back." I nodded, keeping an eye on the door as he worked. The tension in the air was thick, every second stretching into eternity. I could hear the muffled sounds of chaos outside, Corvash soldiers yelling, searching for us. "There!" Davis exclaimed, his eyes lighting up. "I found a map. We can take the tunnels to the east side of the compound, near the perimeter fence." "Lead the way," I said, my pulse quickening at the thought of escape. We moved through the dark maintenance tunnels, the sound of our footsteps muffled against the metal floor. The air was cool and stale, but it felt like a lifeline, a chance to get out before the Corvash found us. After what felt like an eternity, we reached the eastern exit. I could see the outline of the perimeter fence beyond, the sun now high in the sky, casting long shadows across the ground. "Stay low," I instructed, peeking out to assess the area. The courtyard was still bustling with Corvash, but they were focused on searching the command center. "Now's our chance," Davis whispered, his eyes filled with determination. We bolted from the tunnel, sprinting toward the fence. I could feel the adrenaline pumping through my veins, urging me to move faster. We reached the fence, scrambling over the low wall and into the thick brush beyond. "Keep going," I shouted, pushing through the undergrowth as we raced away from the compound. We needed distance between us and the Corvash, enough time to regroup and plan our next move. Once we were far enough away, we slowed down, panting heavily. I leaned against a tree, catching my breath as Davis glanced at the data pad, his expression shifting from fear to exhilaration. "We did it," he said, a grin spreading across his face. "We got the intel." I couldn't help but smile, the thrill of our escape mingling with the adrenaline still coursing through me. Now we can turn the tide. But I knew this was just the beginning. The real fight lay ahead, and we would need every ounce of strength, strategy, and bloodlust to win. We regrouped at the rendezvous point, a hidden glade deep in the forest, far enough from the Corvash command center to catch our breath and plan our next steps. The weight of the data we had stolen felt heavy in my pocket, but it also filled me with a sense of purpose. This was more than just a mission now, it was a fight for survival and a chance to turn the tide against the Corvash. As Davis spread the data pad on a fallen log, I paced back and forth, glancing at the trees that surrounded us. "What's our next move?" I asked, trying to keep the urgency in my voice at bay. Davis studied the information intently, his brow furrowing. "From what I gathered, the Corvash are planning a large-scale assault on a nearby human settlement. They want to crush us before we can regroup. They're underestimating us, thinking we'll fold under pressure." "That's their mistake," I said, clenching my fists. "We need to get this intel back to command and warn the other settlements. We can't let them catch us off guard." "Agreed," Davis replied, determination burning in his eyes. "But we'll need a plan to get back through their territory. It won't be easy with the Corvash on high alert." Andros, who had been leaning against a tree, suddenly straightened. "I might have an idea. If we can create another distraction, we could slip through their lines while they're focused on the commotion." I nodded, intrigued. What do you have in mind? Last time, we hit them hard and fast, Andros said, his voice steady. This time, we could spread false information through their communication networks. If we can intercept their channels and make them believe we're attacking from another direction, they'll split their forces to respond. That could work, I agreed. But we'll need to get to one of their relay stations without being detected. Davis nodded, his excitement evident. I can hack their comms again. If I can get access to their systems, I can spread the false intel while we're causing a distraction. They'll be too busy scrambling to defend against an attack that won't come. Then it's settled, I said, my heart racing with the thrill of our next move. We create chaos, then slip through the cracks to warn the others. With a plan forming, we set out once more, the tension of our previous escape still fresh in our minds. The forest felt alive, the sounds of nature blending with the resolve in our hearts. Each step we took was a reminder that we were not merely fighting for survival. We were fighting to prove the worth of humanity against the so-called ultimate predators. The journey to the nearest Corvash relay station was fraught with tension. We moved cautiously, using the underbrush to stay hidden as we navigated through the alien terrain. The sounds of the Corvash were ever present, their voices carrying through the air, reminding us of the danger we were in. Finally, we reached the relay station, a compact structure camouflaged against the trees. It was lightly guarded, a few sentries patrolling the area, but nothing we couldn't handle. Davis, can you get us inside? I whispered, scanning the perimeter for any signs of trouble. Give me a second, he replied, pulling out his data pad and checking for access points. There's a maintenance entrance around the back. It looks clear. Let's move, I said, signaling for Andros to follow. We crept around to the back, staying low and avoiding the gaze of the guards. As we reached the maintenance entrance, I signaled for Davis to take point. You're the tech guy, just make sure you stay low. Got it, he replied, slipping inside the door. We followed him in, the dimly lit interior a stark contrast to the bright outside world. The hum of machinery surrounded us as we navigated through the narrow corridors. There's the main control room, Davis whispered, pointing down the hall. Once we reach that, I can access their systems. I nodded, keeping my weapon at the ready as we moved cautiously. The tension in the air was palpable, each sound echoing in our ears. We reached the control room door, and I could hear voices inside. On my mark, I said, raising my weapon. 3, 2, 1. I kicked the door open, bursting inside with Davis and Andros right behind me. The Corvash soldiers inside were taken by surprise, their eyes widening as we charged in. Take them out, I shouted, firing at the nearest Corvash. My shot hit its mark, and the soldier crumpled to the ground. Davis sprinted to the control panel, his fingers flying over the keys as Andros covered him. I exchanged fire with the remaining guards, the air thick with tension and chaos. We don't have much time, Davis shouted, the urgency clear in his voice. I need a few more seconds. Make it fast, I yelled, ducking behind a console as plasma bolts whizzed past me. Suddenly, Andros went down, struck by a plasma bolt. Andros, I shouted, rushing to his side. I'm okay. Just keep going, he grunted, pushing himself back up. Don't worry about me. I turned back to the fight, adrenaline coursing through me. We had to hold the line. We couldn't let them overrun us. Finally, Davis shouted, I'm in. The monitors lit up with data, and he began working to spread the false information. Now, I'm sending out a message that we're attacking the eastern perimeter, he exclaimed. They'll buy it. Perfect, I said, feeling a surge of hope. Andros, cover him while he works. I stepped in front of Davis, firing at the advancing Corvash soldiers, my heart pounding in my chest. The firefight intensified, the sound of blaster fire echoing in the small room. Almost done, Davis shouted, his focus unwavering. Just as he finished, the alarms blared, echoing throughout the station. They're on to us, I yelled, grabbing Davis by the arm. We need to get out of here. Go, 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 he shouted, racing toward the exit. We barreled out of the control room, the chaos of the station spiraling around us. The Corvash were regrouping, preparing to chase us down, but we were ready. We sprinted toward the maintenance entrance, dodging plasma fire as we burst through the door. Outside, we could see the perimeter wall, our escape route in sight. "There's the ship," I yelled, pointing toward the gunship hidden behind a thicket. We sprinted toward it, the sound of our pursuers growing louder. I could see the Corvash soldiers spilling out of the relay station, their anger palpable. "Get us in the air," I shouted to Davis as we reached the ship. He jumped into the cockpit, and I took my position beside him. Andros was right behind us, panting heavily. "Get ready to launch," he urged, gripping the side of the door. As Davis powered up the ship, I could see the Corvash soldiers closing in. "Hurry, Davis," I shouted, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on us. "Almost there," he exclaimed, his fingers racing over the controls. The engines roared to life, and I felt the vibrations surge through the ship. "Let's go," I yelled, grabbing the controls as we took off, the ship lifting into the air just as plasma bolts ricocheted off the hull. We soared into the sky, the Corvash stronghold fading beneath us. The weight of the mission began to lift, replaced by the thrill of victory. "Did we do it?" Davis asked, his eyes wide with disbelief. I couldn't help but grin. "Yeah, we did it. We turned their own tactics against them." As we flew toward the command center, I felt a surge of determination. This wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about making a stand. We had proven ourselves against the Corvash, the so-called ultimate predators, and we weren't going to stop now. "Prepare for the counterattack," I said, my voice steady. "We're going to show them the true meaning of humanity's bloodlust." And as we soared into the sky, I felt a sense of hope swelling within me. This was only the beginning. We would fight back, reclaim our place in the galaxy, and remind the Corvash that we were not so easily defeated. The thrill of battle awaited us, and I was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As we reached the human command center, the atmosphere buzzed with urgency. Troops were mobilizing, gathering intel from various sources, and preparing for the Corvash's anticipated assault. "Command, this is Raven Team," I announced over the comms, our ship docking smoothly. "We've secured vital intel on the Corvash. They're planning a large-scale attack on the eastern perimeter." The command center erupted into activity, officers scrambling to strategize. I felt the weight of our mission settle on my shoulders once more. "Get that intel analyzed," a commanding voice shouted. "We need to devise a counter-strategy immediately." Davis and Andros followed me out of the ship, adrenaline still coursing through our veins. We were greeted by Captain Reynolds, a stern but reliable figure with a reputation for never backing down from a fight. "Good work, Raven Team," he said, a hint of a smile breaking through his otherwise serious demeanor. "But we don't have much time. We need to act fast before the Corvash realize we're onto them." "Sir, we have a plan," I said, my voice steady. "If we can hit them first and spread misinformation, we can fracture their lines. They won't know what hit them." "Let's hear it," Reynolds replied, crossing his arms. I quickly outlined our plan, detailing how we could create chaos among the Corvash ranks while simultaneously fortifying our defenses. The officers listened intently, nodding in agreement. "This could work," Reynolds finally said, his expression serious. "But we need every soldier ready for battle. We can't afford any slip-ups." "I'll rally the troops," Andros said, determination burning in his eyes. "We're not just going to defend, we're going to take the fight to them." As we prepared for the counterattack, I couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. Humanity was more than just survival. It was resilience, strength, and the unwavering will to fight for our future. The hours passed quickly, the atmosphere electric with anticipation. Troops were outfitted, strategies fine-tuned, and morale high. I could see the determination etched on every face, a collective promise that we would not be defeated. When the time came to deploy, we moved swiftly, the ships taking off in unison, our hearts beating in time with the engines. The Korvash stronghold loomed ahead, the impending confrontation filled with uncertainty and danger. As we approached, the enemy forces came into view. Korvash ships, sleek and imposing, lined the skies, their weapons primed for battle. "Raven Team, we're going in," I shouted, adrenaline surging through me. "This is for humanity." The air crackled with energy as our ships engaged in a fierce dogfight, the chaos of battle igniting a primal instinct within me. I maneuvered through the throngs of enemy fire, focused and determined. With each passing moment, the fight intensified. Plasma bolts exploded around us, the screech of engines filling the air as we danced between the enemy ships, dodging fire while returning our own. "Focus fire on their command ship," Davis yelled from the co-pilot seat, his fingers dancing over the controls. I nodded, lining up our targeting reticule. "On it. Let's show them our bloodlust." We unleashed a barrage of firepower, the explosions rocking the Korvash ship as it reeled under the assault. The tide of battle began to shift, our forces rallying behind us. "Raven Team, we've broken their lines," Reynolds's voice crackled over the comms, a note of triumph in his tone. "Keep pushing, we're not done yet." I felt a surge of adrenaline as we pressed forward, our resolve solidifying. We were not just fighting for survival, we were fighting to reclaim our place in the universe. In the heat of battle, I caught sight of Andros, his ship engaging multiple enemy fighters with skill and precision. The camaraderie among us ignited a fierce determination, fueling our every move. "Let's finish this," I shouted, rallying my team. "For every fallen comrade, for every life at stake." We dove into the fray, the chaos of battle surrounding us. The Korvash were faltering, their once mighty presence crumbling beneath the force of our onslaught. Finally, we broke through their defenses, the enemy ships scattering in retreat. Our forces pushed deeper into their stronghold, the thrill of victory electrifying the air. As we landed on the Korvash planet, I stepped out of the ship, the taste of triumph in my mouth. This was our victory, a testament to humanity's strength and resilience. The Korvash may have claimed to be the ultimate predators, but we had proven them wrong. With our bloodlust ignited, we had faced the darkness and emerged victorious. "Let's take the fight to them," I said, glancing back at my comrades. "They will remember today as the day humanity stood tall against the predators of the universe." And as we prepared to advance, I felt a profound sense of hope. This was only the beginning of our journey, a testament to the indomitable spirit of humanity. Together, we would carve our place among the stars. In the wake of our hard-won victory against the Korvash, I stood at the helm of our new flagship, the Bloodlust rising, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing down on my shoulders. The cheers of our troops echoed in the background, a symphony of triumph that celebrated our survival. But beneath the surface of this jubilant atmosphere, tension brewed. The newly formed Bloodlust Alliance had united humans with other species Ternaxians, fierce warriors with an indomitable spirit, and the Villarans, a technologically advanced race skilled in manipulation of energy and weaponry. We were stronger together, but the scars of war ran deep. Trust was fragile, especially when past loyalties were called into question. "Captain," Davis's voice broke through my thoughts as he approached, his expression serious. "We've received messages from our new allies. They're eager to discuss our next move." "Good," I replied, forcing a smile. "We need to solidify our plans. The Korvash will not take our victory lightly." As we entered the conference room, I was struck by the diversity of the alliance. Ternaxians towered over humans, their rugged physiques adorned with battle scars, while the Villarans, with their shimmering skin and sharp intellect, exuded an air of quiet confidence. "Welcome, comrades," I began, feeling the weight of their gazes upon me. "We've fought together against a common enemy, but our work is far from over. The Korvash will retaliate, and we must be ready." A Ternaxian warrior named Korath stepped forward, his voice a low growl. "The Korvash think they can intimidate us with their numbers. They will learn to fear our alliance." The Villaran ambassador, a sleek figure named Lyra, nodded in agreement. We possess technology they have never encountered. If we combine our strengths, we can launch an offensive that will cripple their command. As discussions progressed, I felt a sense of hope beginning to blossom. We had a plan, a united front against the oppressive forces that sought to keep us in chains. Yet, a nagging doubt lingered in the back of my mind. I knew that with power came vulnerability. Later that night, I found myself staring out into the stars from the ship's observation deck, the vastness of space both comforting and daunting. I was lost in thought when I heard footsteps behind me. It was Davis, his expression thoughtful. "Something on your mind?" he asked, joining me at the railing. "I just can't shake the feeling that the Corvash won't let this go easily," I admitted. "What if they have spies among us? What if we can't trust everyone in the Alliance?" Davis shrugged, his brow furrowing. "Trust is hard-won, especially after everything we've been through. But we can't let fear dictate our actions. We need to focus on our goals." "Right," I said, trying to convince myself. "We need to be proactive, not reactive. Tomorrow, we finalize our plans and prepare to strike at the heart of the Corvash Empire." The following day was a whirlwind of strategizing and preparations. We set a course for the Corvash homeworld, aiming to exploit their weaknesses while ensuring our forces were at full strength. Each allied species contributed unique insights, strengthening our offensive plan. But amidst the excitement, a sense of unease clung to me. I watched our allies closely, searching for any signs of betrayal. The Corvash were cunning, and I knew they would stop at nothing to undermine our efforts. As we reached the outskirts of the Corvash territory, the tension in the command room was palpable. "We're ready to launch our assault," Korath announced, his voice a deep rumble. "But we must remain vigilant. The Corvash will retaliate fiercely." Suddenly, a loud alarm blared through the ship, red lights flashing in a chaotic dance. "What the hell is happening?" I shouted, adrenaline surging through my veins. "Security breach in the lower decks," Davis exclaimed, frantically tapping his controls. "We're being sabotaged." Without hesitation, I sprang into action, gathering a small team of soldiers and heading toward the source of the alarm. As we rushed through the corridors, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. When we reached the lower decks, chaos unfolded before us. A group of Corvash infiltrators had breached our ship, their sleek forms moving with practiced precision. They were dismantling our systems, sabotaging our weapons, and sowing discord among our ranks. "Stop them!" I shouted, raising my weapon as we engaged the enemy. The air crackled with tension as blaster fire erupted, lighting up the darkened corridor. Davis stayed close, firing alongside me. "We need to secure the area before they cause any more damage." As we fought, I caught sight of a figure slipping away from the chaos. "Who the hell?" I began, but the figure vanished around the corner. "Focus!" Davis yelled, pulling me back to the fight. Together, we managed to drive the Corvash infiltrators back, but the damage was done. After securing the area, we gathered to assess the situation. "How did they get in?" I demanded, looking around at the worried faces of our allies. "It's possible we have a traitor among us," Davis said grimly. "Someone helped them bypass our security systems." A ripple of shock ran through the group, and I could see the seeds of mistrust taking root. "We need to find out who it is, fast," I said, my voice firm. "If we can't trust each other, we're as good as dead." But before we could begin our investigation, the lights flickered, and an emergency alert blared throughout the ship. "Captain, we're receiving a transmission from the Corvash," one of the crew shouted. "Put it on screen," I commanded, feeling a mix of apprehension and anger. The holographic image of a Corvash general appeared, his eyes glinting with malice. "You think you can hide behind alliances? You are weak, and I will prove it by taking your ship and your lives." With a surge of determination, I clenched my fists. "We will not be intimidated. We are stronger together, and we will not fall." The general laughed, a cruel sound that echoed through the room. "You may have won a battle, but the war is far from over. You will witness the destruction of your precious alliance." As the transmission ended, I felt the weight of the world pressing down on me. If we were to survive, we had to root out the traitor before it was too late. With the threat of betrayal looming, we mobilized our forces, determined to confront the Corvash and secure our alliance. As the bloodlust rising surged through enemy territory, we could feel the tension in the air, a palpable mix of fear and determination. "Captain," Davis said, breaking through my thoughts as we prepared for the battle ahead. "We've identified potential suspects. It's crucial we address this before we engage." "Let's gather our allies," I replied, my resolve hardening. "We need to confront this head-on. If we can't trust each other now, we might as well be fighting alone." We convened in the conference room once more, the mood somber as I laid out the situation. "There is a traitor among us, and we must identify them before the Corvash strike." As I scanned the faces around the table, I saw suspicion etched in their features. "We need to work together to root out the traitor. Who has access to our systems? Who could have helped the Corvash?" Lyra, the Villarin ambassador, spoke up. "We need to set a trap. We can feign a weakness in our defenses to draw out the traitor." "Agreed," I said, feeling a sense of urgency. "We'll create a false target and see who responds." As we put our plan into action, I felt the weight of uncertainty settle on my shoulders. Would we really be able to identify the traitor, or would this only deepen the divide among us? Hours passed in anxious anticipation. We gathered on the bridge, monitoring our false target while remaining vigilant. The tension was thick, a tangible reminder of what was at stake. Suddenly, a warning alarm blared. "We have incoming ships," one of the crew shouted, panic creeping into his voice. "Prepare for battle," I commanded, adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Everyone, to your stations." As we readied ourselves for combat, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. The Corvash were here, and if our traitor had tipped them off, we would be fighting not just for our survival, but for the very soul of the Bloodlust Alliance. The enemy ships emerged from the void, sleek and deadly. As we engaged in a fierce dogfight, my heart raced. The stakes had never been higher, and we couldn't afford to fail. In the chaos of battle, I caught sight of movement near the command station. A figure was trying to access our systems, their intentions clear. "Davis," I shouted, pointing. "We have a breach." Without hesitation, Davis and I raced toward the command station, our hearts pounding. As we reached the figure, I gasped in shock one of the Ternaxians, a trusted ally named Garrick. "Garrick, what are you doing?" I demanded, disbelief flooding my voice. He turned, eyes wild with desperation. "You don't understand. The Corvash promised power. They can't be defeated." "Traitor!" Davis shouted, lunging for him. But Garrick was fast, dodging our grasp and sprinting toward the control panel. "You'll see. The Corvash will rule, and you will all be nothing." As he activated the panel, alarms blared, signaling a breach in our defenses. In that moment, I felt a surge of anger and betrayal wash over me. We had fought so hard to unite, and now one of our own was tearing us apart. "Stop him!" I shouted, desperation fueling my voice. Davis lunged forward, tackling Garrick to the ground. The two struggled, and I joined the fray, our combined efforts overpowering him. With Garrick subdued, I turned to the crew. "Reinforce our defenses. We need to hold the line against the Corvash." As we secured the command station, the Corvash ships bore down on us, their firepower relentless. "Prepare for impact," I shouted, adrenaline surging as we engaged the enemy. The battle was fierce, each moment a test of our resolve. I fought alongside my comrades, the sense of unity igniting a fire within me. We were stronger together, and we would not fall. Finally, the tide began to turn. With Garrick neutralized, we were able to coordinate our defenses, launching a counteroffensive that pushed back the Corvash forces. As the smoke cleared, I stood at the bridge, breathing heavily. We had faced betrayal and emerged victorious. With the Corvash in retreat, I turned to my allies, gratitude swelling in my chest. We've proven that trust and unity can overcome any challenge. Together, we are stronger than any enemy. As the cheers erupted around us, I knew this was just the beginning of our journey. The Bloodlust alliance would endure, and we would rise against any force that threatened our freedom. Together, we would forge a new legacy among the stars, a testament to the resilience and spirit of humanity and our allies.